what's the impact of brand identity to individual identities going to be given the power of Latino youth?
We're 20% of the population, general population. We're 25% of the youth. But let me tell you a number that will tell you how much we're growing and how fast we're growing. Almost 30% of the births today in the United States are Latino. According to the Department of Labor, 78% of all the new workforce in America in the next 10 years will come from the Latino community. It's the community that is not only driving consumption, it's also driving the vote. It's driving the workforce. It's driving home ownership. It's driving entrepreneurship. So that is why it's vital that people know these numbers, because if they don't, one day they literally will wake up and they will have been, lost, quite frankly. The Latino youth is infinitely more assertive, more outspoken, more demanding of representation, and not only representation, as you said at the beginning, authentic representation, positive representation, aspirational, role modeling representation, and they act on it.
You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Llopis. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Personalization Outbreak Podcast. In 2019, I released a book called Leadership in the Age of Personalization, which has now evolved into my organization's platform. But what is leadership in the age of personalization? It's about breaking free from these outdated leadership and operating models that actually stifle creativity and potential. It represents a shift from restrictive environments where rigid playbooks dictate actions and how people are perceived, to empowering individuals and teams to actually unleash and leverage their unique strengths. See, by understanding people on a deeper level, we can modernize traditional leadership and operating standards, moving beyond suppression to focusing on growth, innovation, and the freedom to thrive. See, the ultimate goal is actually to standardize personalization, enabling agility and resilience, authenticity and ownership to drive innovative outcomes. Now, the origin roots takes us to what this entire episode will be about today. See, the origin roots of leadership in the age of personalization come from what I coined in 2015, the cultural demographic shift, a moment when large cultural segments of the population, they grow fast enough to profoundly influence our actions and decisions. Now, this shift is not about diversity. It's about the inclusion of diverse thinking. It underscores the need for businesses to rethink how they operate, explore innovative strategies that reflect the realities and values of individuals. Now, as these generational and cultural differences expand, we've quickly learned that a one-size-fits-all approach just no longer works. Instead, businesses must adopt personalized approaches, not just in the marketplace, but especially in the workplace, where critical marketplace decisions are made. Now, our guest today, Ana Valdez, is the president and CEO of the Latino Donor Collaborative. And she's going to just wait till you get to meet her. She's extraordinarily dynamic, and she's going to take the time to really highlight the persistent stereotypes that are actually hindering genuine political and corporate engagement with the fastest growing culturally diverse population in the United States, Hispanics. See, Ana will attempt to address the critical need for institutions to adopt personalized approaches to build trust and connect authentically with U.S. Latinos by addressing their unique histories, values, and priorities. She'll also spotlight the immense untapped potential of this demographic, particularly amongst Latino youth who proudly embrace a dual identity as 100% American and 100% Latino. Ana, I'm so excited for you to be here today, and I greatly appreciate your time. You're constantly on the road, speaking with Fortune 500 companies, large institutions, the White House. I mean, you're all in on this. And as a Cuban American myself, I'm honored to speak with you, and thank you for your time today.
No, Glenn, thank you. It's my honor. It's my pleasure. Our conversations are always so dynamic, and I love the opportunity to not only share new data with you, but with your audience. So I'm very excited about this chat. I can't wait.
So Ana, tell us a little bit about the collaborative. What is it? Why does it exist? And really, what makes it different, right? And I'm going to just be a little skeptical for those who might be listening and are skeptical about knowing that there's yet another Latino organization that's trying to drive meaningful change. What is it? Well, tell us a little bit about the collaborative and why it really matters.
I am so excited that you started with that question because that I always, exactly as you're saying, there's so many organizations and all of them are, in my opinion, they probably have a reason to be, but we're different and we're unique. And we actually serve all those organizations and all American resource allocators and anybody that really wants to grow. And I'll tell you why. So, first of all, we're young, right? This organization started in 2010, which, we're only 14 years old. And it started when, all the stereotypes started becoming laws. I don't know if you remember the SBC 70 in Arizona and then expanding this, allowing, racial profiling against Latinos. And, not only in the border states, but in Louisiana and Georgia and other states. And so, a group of Latino leaders emerged and said, Latino business leaders, by the way, emerged and say, we need to figure out what's happening. How come they can do this racial profiling to Latinos, but any other community would be outraged, of course, and more importantly, people wouldn't do it, but they feel they have the right to do it against Latinos. And this is not only Latinos in the border, by the way, or Latinos from Mexico, unfortunately for everybody, because this is a misunderstanding that costs a lot of money. When people think about immigrants and when people think about Latinos, they think about all Latinos, even Latinos that have been here forever, which is the case of most Mexican Americans whose family were here before it even became the United States. But also for Cubans that come here completely, documented, for Puerto Ricans that are American citizens. It's a stereotype that really takes over the whole community. And it's really a problem, not only because it's unfair, but probably for resource allocators, the most important part is because it doesn't allow you to make good decisions, right? So when these leaders got together, they decided, we're going to use data because we do know that Latinos are contributing tremendously to this community, to this country, actually, but we need to prove it. So that's how, fast forward 14 years later, we are a think tank. Our uniqueness is that, unfortunately, first of all, there are not a lot of think tanks that are fully focused on Latinos. Then the second one is we're the only think tank that is fully focused on the economic impact of Latinos. And of course, after the economic impact, we go deeper into what other changes do Latinos bring, but it's always from the focus of Latino economic contributions. So that's our yes, Glenn.
No, I love that. And I think that's the narrative that people don't know about. So I want to take a
Exactly.
step back a moment because you there's three words you said that really grabbed my attention. Making good decisions. What is it? Can you give any example or at least perspective around how organizations are making bad decisions
Yes.
around the Latino community and what the economic implications are of those bad decisions?
Absolutely. Thank you. That is a fantastic question for me. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to give you a political. Well, first of all, we're a 501(c)(3), so we're a nonprofit. We cannot be and don't want to be political, but I'm going to give you an example that comes from the recent elections, non-political, just descriptive. And I'm going to give you an example also from the commercial world, from consumer products. And we can go, you can choose. I can give you an example from the telecom industry. I can give you an example from beverage industries. I can give you an example from, retail, et cetera. But let's start with the political. So you saw the big surprises that emerged from the latest election, right? One of the biggest headlines, and that still are out there, is how Latinos voted differently than what expected. And of course, the first thing I always say is, first of all, don't ever take Latinos for granted, because that was a big mistake. But importantly, it's the lack of information of who Latinos are and where, right? We're a community that is very that is non-homogeneous, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that gather us together. So if you don't know the numbers that we produced, you create stereotyping campaigns and strategies that make you lose elections or win elections. I'm talking about both parties, right?
Mhm.
One of the things, it literally, we work a lot with brands, and brands tell us, or brands that are going up in value, and also brands that are not. And, sometimes some brands wake up and suddenly they were leaders and they're not. And these are surprises that come because they don't know where the growth is coming up from first. And they don't know the 25% of youth that is consuming their products. Because I don't know if you know these numbers, and maybe you do, but I don't know if your audience knows. But in the United States, 25% of all the young people are Latino. And 93% of them were born here. So they're not immigrants. They're Latinos born here. So when you don't know those basic numbers, how can you make decisions that actually bring you growth, right? I'm going to give you a great example on the consumer product,
Mhm.
market. 8 years ago, 7 years ago, actually, Constellation Brands bought Modelo. They didn't buy it from the Mexican owners because anyway, there was a, monopoly issue. And anyway, long story short, and that's a long story I don't want to get into. But 7 years ago, they bought the brand Modelo when it was freshly brought from the United States. I
Hmm.
mean, from Mexico to the United States. At that point, first of all, Modelo was the number 18 in sales in the United States. They said, you know what? Let's focus fully on Latinos. Let's be unapologetically targeting Latinos in every way, and let's get them. This group is actually only Anglos, but they knew the numbers. And this marketing department, this company, decided to target Latinos. I don't know if you or your audience and your audience have seen Modelo's commercials, but they're brilliant,
Of
right?
course,
They're
they are, they
incredible,
are, they
right?
are, they are authentically
They're,
Latino. But I
exactly.
will say, I bet even some of those ads are misperceived. But go
Well,
ahead.
let me tell you the
Not,
story.
not, not for
And
me.
both of
Not
you,
for me. Hey, look, you're talking to a kid or someone who was a kid that was born and raised in Azusa, California. So when I
yeah,
see
okay,
that,
so yeah,
of
exactly.
course I know. I mean, this
Yeah,
is
you know.
anyway. But go ahead.
Totally. I agree with you. And, I was born and raised in Mexico City. I came here, after my master's. So I was older. I was, in a lot of different ways. I've been here for 29 years. So I've been here for the longest time, longer than at home, but still, I am. And so you and I understand this. So these people, they started this promotion unapologetic. They were not only in Spanish language, channels, they actually went to the mid time of the Super Bowl. They were everywhere, mainstream, prime time of English language, TV, etc. And it was this incredible advertising with the coolest music. I don't know how to say it, but like it's like do 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 to like super, super cool. And then there was like, okay, Jose Martinez came to this country with nothing. And after 7 years of working hard, he built an empire, like all these things, but it was all Latinos, all immigrants, all unapologetic, and they said, who cares? I just want the Latino community. Well, fast forward 7 years, today, Modelo is the number one beer in the country, above Budweiser. I have bad news for people that are nationalistic. Modelo sells more beer than Budweiser. Now, the moral of this, first of all, they knew the market, right? They knew that growing with the growing Latino market was going to be a perfect formula. What they didn't know, and I've spoken with them, so what they didn't know is that Latinos are actually also driving pop culture. And so when they did this, they crossed over to all consumers, because you don't get to number one beer with only Latino consumers, as you know. So they just crossed over. And today, they're proudly number one beer in the country. So you see, you asked me for examples. Imagine that you don't know, because I can also give you examples of people that didn't know or didn't act on these numbers.
Okay,
And
so
I tell
before
you,
we so before we go there, Ana, let's
yes,
step back, right? For especially again, out of all due respect for the audience that may not understand everything that we're talking about. Remember what I said before. The cultural demographic shift is when large cultural segments of the population grow enough to profoundly influence our actions and decisions. See, you've given a perfect example of how something that one might perceive as an ad targeting Latinos was actually targeting a much broader audience
exactly.
that was representing pop culture that
Yep.
had actually been inspired
There
by
you go.
Latinos. So I go back to this because, see, let's go back to leadership in the age of personalization. I want to put some framing around this, okay? Because I think this
Yes.
is important. You gave an example of what I call the shift from brand identity to individual identities. And what does that mean? Well, the brand identity says this is what we think you need and want. And the individual identity say, hey, well, hold on, brands. I don't want you to define me. I want to help define you based upon what I want.
Yeah.
And see, this is why Modelo grew to number one and why that acquisition was so smart, because they saw that the traditional brand identity play of this is what you should have because I tell you this was what you should drink, those days were gone. And there was this emerging population of Latinos that said, wait a second, I've been trying to reclaim my identity for years. And they brought these two things together and it worked. How's that? Make sense? Are we in
That
alignment?
exactly.
Now I say this because this is important. This example from brand identity to individual identities is not just what's happening with Latinos, it's happening everywhere. But when Latinos are the fastest growing populations, who do you think is influencing the rest of those populations?
Absolutely.
This community is. So, again, I want to make sure that our audience realizes what you're trying to, what you're not trying, what you're teaching us here is that when there are these cultural shifts in society, it's these demographics of Latinos that are actually having more everyday influence in our lives than most people know. So here's my follow-up question for you. And I know we can, if we got time, I want to go back to some examples of what didn't work. But can we just go fast forward a moment because this is going to represent where this country's going.
Mhm.
How does this play out with the emerging Latino youth, right? Because people can see us as, from Generation X, I'm going to guess here. But, you know, Modelo played a bet on a different demographic and it worked. but yet they're targeting that younger demographic, that soon, probably that early age drinker, be 21 and above, or is that the drinking population now? Anyway, what's the impact of brand identity to individual identities going to be given the power of Latino youth?
Well, I mean, that's a brilliant question. Again, I love it. I tell you, our conversations are always so exciting because you go to the point. It's not the superficial, kind of interview, which is great. So first, let me give you some data so that I start answering your question. First, as I said, we're 20% of the population, general population. We're 25% of the youth. But let me tell you a number that will tell you how much we're growing and how fast we're growing. Almost 30% of the births today in the United States are Latino, which is crazy because if you're talking about people that self-identify as Latinos having 30% of the births in this country, when the young population is 25% only, you're talking about this incredibly actually the fastest growing community in this country. Another piece of data, and then I'll start with the most clear explanation and examples. According to the Department of Labor, Glenn, 78% of all the new workforce in America in the next 10 years will come from the Latino community. Not 78% of all the workforce, of all the new workforce. Who's nurturing, who's feeding, who's supplying the workforce in this country? 78% of the total is Latino. This is according to the Department of Labor. So when you talk about growth and why is this growth so important? It's literally the community that is not only driving consumption, it's also driving the vote. It's driving the workforce. It's driving home ownership. It's driving entrepreneurship, right? So that is why it's vital that people know these numbers, because if they don't, one day they literally will wake up and they will have been, lost, quite frankly. We just finished a convening with top Latina leaders in the corporate world. And one CMO said, it is mathematically impossible to grow without including Latinos. It's mathematically impossible. And the numbers that I gave you probably illustrate that, right? Now, one of the things every year we issue, this year we issued 10 reports. So that's why I'm going to talk about several different reports that we have. One of the reports that we released this year is, in my opinion, one of my favorite ever, which is Latino Youth 2030. It was a partnership first. It started as a partnership between Kantar, which, as you know, is the largest market research company in the world for consumer products, and the LDC. What would be our surprise that suddenly brands started uniting and wanting in, right? We actually had to reject 4 brands that we had too many. We ended up doing it with L'Oreal, Colgate-Palmolive, Capital One, and Univision. What we found was, well, there's so many incredible findings. The public report is on our website, so you can always go to our website and download it. But I always like to summarize it in 2 things. One is how Latino youth is different from their parents, and how Latino youth is different from their peers, Gen X's and Gen Alphas, right? How are they different from their parents? And that goes straight to your question, Glenn. I haven't been lost. I promise you, I'm going straight to you. But the first one goes straight to your question. The Latino youth is infinitely more assertive, more outspoken, more demanding of representation, and not only representation, as you said at the beginning, authentic representation, positive representation, aspirational, role modeling representation, and they act on it. I'm going to give you an example that happened through the report. All of us were behind. It was a Zoom, right, session. It was a focus group. We were behind the scenes. The kid that was being interviewed didn't know we were there, but we were able to feed questions to the interviewer from Kantar. And this interview specifically was a an 18-year-old underserved Latino kid that was going to college, first generation. So the kid said, now I need to get a computer. And the interviewer said, what computer are you getting? And he said, I'm getting an Apple. And the interviewer said, why an Apple? If, it's very expensive, you can get something very comparable for much less. And this kid was an underserved kid, so it really mattered, right? And he said, no, I did my research and I found that Apple has one Latina board member, two Latinos in the C-suite, and I can see myself reflected in their advertising. So I'm going to support the brand. You're talking about an 18-year-old underserved first gen Latino kid that got a full ride to college. So he's super smart and he knows what he's doing. So when my generation, we were loyal to a fault, right? I've been using at my house Fabuloso since the day I was born and will always use Fabuloso. I don't care about the advertising. I don't care what Procter does. I am going to use Fabuloso. Well, these kids are not. These kids are like, oh, no, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to support brands to the core. So brands that actually represent me. So to your question, how is this important? Imagine as the evolution of this workforce, this consumer, this voter happens little by little, because it's very organic, right? It's not immigration. It is actually natural births of Americans happens. The brands that are sleeping will die.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that because well, I know that a big part of the collaborative is to, change the narrative about how people see and know the Latino population here in the United States. And if there's one thing I've learned in general about people is that we don't see people as they evolve over time. Like, for example, if I haven't talked to somebody in 10 years, they remember me from who I was 10 years ago, and they still think that's who I am. This is the case with, I would say, all culturally diverse populations or anybody, but even more so Latinos.
Yeah.
So, how do you move a mountain where there has been this specific narrative? You could address that if you'd like around what it's been. But how do you move this narrative so that people start making the connection between a community and its economic impact? Because typically, right, for some specific Latino populations, they think that these populations are hurting the economy rather than adding value to the economy. And the examples that you've shared, Ana, are clear examples that there is an economic value add of our community. But
Yeah.
how do you get the masses to see that without having someone like you have to educate them? Give
Yeah,
us a
I
thought on
agree.
that. And thank you for letting me ask this question because
Of course.
I'm already starting to think about, okay, how are people interpreting this discussion and where's this thing going? But go
Yeah.
ahead, please.
No, again, great question. I think so. I'm sure that I don't want to claim that we have the only solution to the problem. I'm sure there are other people that have great ideas. One of the things I'm going to tell you what we see is responsible for most of the stereotypings, quite frankly. And then I'm going to tell you what we're doing to change that, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
So to start with, we do because our mission is to change the narrative of Latinos. We have to be accountable. So every 3 years, we produced a national poll about the perception of who Latinos are. And it's a national poll. The latest one was actually incredibly detailed because it was so large that we were able to find out how the general public, thinks of us, but also how African Americans, how Asians, and Asians divided in 4 different nationalities, and how Latinos ourselves think about our community. And what we find is that and there's so many great findings. Again, the findings are in our website, but one piece that I want to take from it is that every step of the way, in every one of the polls that we've done, the people that have the worst perception of Latinos are people that haven't met a Latino. And then if they, in the degree that they have met a Latino or dealt with a Latino, they are much more friendly. Unfortunately, many people in this country haven't met a Latino. We're concentrated in the coast or in the border, right? And there's a big part of the country that haven't really experienced meeting a Latino or have even seen sometimes, Latinos. This is changing. We're actually coming into all your states. But anyway, but in the meantime, guess who produced the image of Latinos of those states that hate Latinos and hate immigrants because they think that we're here to take everything from them? It's it's the states where, as I said, between the coast that get their information from media, entertainment, news, newspapers. Social media is better. In social media, the participation of Latinos is actually, especially in the national arena, bigger. But in general, when we asked people, in the poll, okay, why do you not like Latinos? Why do you think they're evil? They would say, haven't you seen the shows? Haven't you seen the news? Haven't you read, the newspapers? And of course, we then went on to create a report on representation of Latinos in the news. And we found that first of all, there's only 2 or 3% of stories of Latinos, depending on the year, in news. But when there are, it's about the rapist, the criminal, the undocumented that did something wrong, the lazy, all this explosive. And of course, we know news, right? They need explosive themes too, but we are their favorite punching bags for it. And so for somebody that lives in the Midwest and has never seen a Latino, that's a big informational supply, source, right? So media has a lot to do. Let me give you an example of this year only. We actually had a meeting yesterday, my team and I, we had a meeting about the report of 2024. And your audience will resonate with this. Very few shows, only 2% of leads were Latinos in English media, in English entertainment, films and shows. But more importantly, almost 70% of them were horribly stereotyping. And I'm not saying that they're bad shows. Some of them are award-winning shows. One of them is resonating for the Oscars, by the way, Emilia Perez. It's a beautiful piece of art. Unfortunately, it's about narcos. You have, Emilia Perez, you have Griselda, you have Narcos, you have Mayans MCs, you have Queen of the South. I'm not saying they're bad shows. They're entertaining. That's why people are watching them. But you don't see a middle class or a professional person or a hero or, and some of them are out there like Lincoln Lawyer on Wednesday. And, there are some few of them. As I said, only 1% of the whole programming is Latino. But that's where the big, big misunderstanding of who Latinos are. Have you ever seen a story about somebody like you? I've never seen a story on TV, somebody like me, because we're supposed to be exceptions because everybody else is supposed to be a criminal or a pobrecito that crossed the border undocumented and was abused. I mean, it is just last thing, because I know I talk a lot, but last thing I'm going to tell you on my nerdy side. According to the US Census, 16% of Latinos live in poverty. This is the US Census, the recent one. Nobody talks about the 84 that are not living in poverty. Nobody, except the Latino Donor Collaborative with this data.
You know what I'm getting out of this? And again, if I can go back, because I'd like to give some framing around this. Earlier, we talked about brand identity to individual identities. And you provided an excellent example. You've just provided another part of this framework I have around leading in the age of personalization, and it's called moving from tribal to human. See, we have a tendency, particularly here in the United States, to put people in boxes, to categorize everything, to silo everything, because we've created these environments that say, if you win, someone has to lose. And what you're saying very eloquently is that for some reason, we continue to be put in roles that make people see like we're less than. But why does this happen? I mean, look, being in the media yourself, I mean, we know it's what's going to get people's eyeballs, what's going to get people's attention. But are we doing that at the expense of this country's future? And
Exactly.
that's really my question because in the end, you also said we don't know, a lot of people don't haven't met a Latino.
Yeah.
I have news for you. Most people that meet me don't even think I'm Latino.
Right.
Entonces,
Right.
cuando yo empiezo a hablar español y explico esto y lo otro, y then mi
Exactly.
apellido y al fin, and they start seeing that I'm a
Exactly.
whole other person when I'm starting to speak, they go, wait a sec, I didn't know that you spoke Spanish. I said, well, you didn't give me an opportunity to get to know me. And
Yeah.
that's why every time someone asks me, Glenn, tell me about yourself, the first thing I tell them is that I'm proud to be the son of Cuban immigrants.
Love
Um,
that.
and I share this because this is a push to our community here. And what
Yeah.
is it? When people ask about who you are, tell them who you are, not what you do. Because no one really cares if you're the executive to this or the owner of this. People want to know who you are. So I share this because as much as we talk about the upside, we have to turn the spotlight of accountability on ourselves and saying, wait a second, how do we professionally represent ourselves so that we can help others have a
Exactly.
conversation about who we are, not what we do? But I will tell you, why does this happen? Because for years, Latinos, and this is why I believe Latino youth are really going to change the page, is that we've always felt like if someone knew my title, they would respect me more. And I've got news for you. They respect you less. Why? Because it doesn't matter what your role is today. The question is, what are you doing to be part of the opportunities that we're dealing with during these times of uncertainty? In other words, the hierarchical roles really don't matter because it's not what you've done for the last 30 years, it's what you've done today and what you're going to do tomorrow. So I just share this. You don't have to agree with me with this on this, Anna, but I wanted to point this out because we ourselves have created that tribalism ourselves.
Yeah.
And we've got to
Yeah.
do a better job of making it a little bit easier for people to get to know us. Anyway, your
Yeah,
thoughts.
I agree with you. I agree with you in most of it, and I'm going to tell you what I don't agree with you. I agree with you that we don't know in a lot of different ways. We kind of present, and I won't include myself there because I was born and raised in a country where everybody's Mexican, so I've never been intimidated by non-Mexicans, right? I mean, it was never an issue in Mexico because everybody's Mexican. So for me, being Mexican is a pride thing. But I do see that in the Mexican American community and in general in the Latino community, there in my generation, again, we have to define. In my generation, there's been a need, an emotional need to fit in by saying who you are in importance rather than saying, as you well say, I'm a children of Cuban parents, or me, I'm a Mexican, right? Um, and so there's been that, that need of like fitting in as I'm an American, or implying it, if not ever saying it, but implying it. I also know that this stereotyping, this profiling of media and other, outlets have provoked that. I don't think that Latinos are not proud. I think they've made them not proud because, they've been bullied at school. They've been taught by teachers that were ignorant. It's a social problem, I have to say. I think it's not that they are not proud, it's that they haven't been allowed to be proud. So that's in the part that I don't agree with you. And maybe it's easier if you were born and raised in Miami, which is really dominated by Cubans, which is fabulous. That's why everybody that I know that has lived there, they say, great, I can be proud. But once you get out of Miami, things are not like that. I live in Los Angeles, and you can't imagine how many people have come to me and say things about immigration or about Mexicans. And when I call them on it, because I always call them on it, they say, well, but you're different. I'm like, no, I'm not different. Even though and I look Latina and I sound Latina. So they tell me that I'm different because I achieved more, because they know me. And I say, no, I'm not different. Again, I give them the data of the census. They don't know that there are many Anas around there, many Anas in the country that are creating incredible things. And that's what the LDC is doing. We're actually bringing the data so that not only others know what our value is, but that we know what our value is, so that we unite Latinos, so that they know who they are. They're not exceptions. We're actually the rule. Only 16% of Latinos live in poverty. So that for me is something key of what we do at the LDC.
Let me just not close our discussion, but close this topic here. Um, I don't think many people even know who Mexicans are.
They
And
don't.
why? And why? I mean, look, I can tell you I've been fortunate. I've not only visited Mexico and Mexico City and different parts of Mexico for well over 10 years with a food venture I started with partners in San Miguel de Allende in Guanajuato,
Oh,
Mexico.
lovely. I love that.
And so I know Mexico. And when you go to Mexico, you see a lot of Anas. In fact, you see a lot of
Yeah.
Glens.
Thank you.
And so well, maybe not Glenn, the name, but the point is
Not the
that
name, not the name.
but this is a country whose identity has been created by government. But when
Yeah.
you go to the people, holy smokes, there is nothing but talent. And much like
Yeah.
anywhere in any country, you've got your pockets of opportunity. But my whole point is if you ever are not understanding who Latinos are, go try to visit their mother countries if you can. Go
I
try to meet, get to know us and ask questions because in the end, I think that we're wanting the exact same thing, Ana. And where I'm going with the whole discussion around tribalism to human is that we ourselves can do a better job of creating greater unity, especially since we're a monolithic uh, community, but we're all looking for the same things. It's
yeah.
just packaged differently. And so, so let's go back to this stat that you shared, which I thought was extraordinarily enlightening, that 30% of births come from the Hispanic community. How is this going to create economic impact? And how many organizations out there are even prepared for what's about to happen?
There you go. That again, brilliant question. So first of all, imagine the um the potential, right? The opportunity. Like you have in this country a community that is growing, that is fertile, that has a birth rate above replacement, which is not common for a first world country. You know that, right? So they are born here. They actually were here before the British came. I mean, actually, this was their country. I mean, states, I'm going to tell you the list, and I always love to say this. My stepdad was American, and he loved it when I said it. I'm going to tell you the states that are named in Spanish, not because the British were kind enough to let us, name them, but because when they came in, there were already empires in those states. Oregon, Colorado, Nuevo Mexico, California, Montana, Texas, Arizona, Florida. All those are Spanish names, not Indian names, or I mean, not Native American names. Although it's a mix, obviously, of Spanish and Native American, which is the fabulous, amazing part with the Mexican community. Um, they were named in Spanish because they were already, world trade, centers at that point, when they became the United States. So my point is, imagine you have this culture inside. And imagine so now that you imagine that, and that you know that because that's a fact in history, imagine now that you're actually saying that all of them are recent arrivals, they are lazy, they're takers, they're not contributing, they're actually a plague. Most of them are criminals and rapists, as some people said. Um, so you see, there are 30% of the births. Do you see how this is harakiri, like Japanese people say? This is really self-flagellation. I mean, if you actually are acting on the stereotypes rather than being, rational and act on the facts. This for me is a complete no brainer, right? But still, many people subconsciously or consciously act on the stereotyping.
So, with this in mind, I think this is a good segue here. DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion. We found out this week that Walmart is, uh, taking a few steps back on this. It's not that they're removing it, but they're going to not be so engaged with it, and they're following others like Ford and others.
Yeah.
What is the view? What view does the collaborative have about DE&I? I mean, it seems to me just from our discussions that that's clearly not the focus here. It's about driving a narrative as an economic engine. How does your work sometimes maybe, I don't know if get lost, that might be too strong of a phrase, but hits the wall where when DEI comes up?
Yes.
What's the challenge there? And what are you doing to overcome this? Because the discussions that we've had in this call are very clear. Latinos are helping shape brands, new product developments, new brands, and new ways of thinking. Latinos are not seen and known as individuals, so we haven't even begun to realize just what the consequences of the economic growth will be associated with their untapped potential that is still hidden from the mainstream. That whether we are because we're monolithic, we have a variety of different types of Latinos, but we all contribute in our own unique way. So the narrative for me is very clear. All this is boiling up to what? Less of diversity, more about creating an engine of innovation through the unique thinking and perspectives that we bring that will drive future growth. How would I do there?
Yeah, that's brilliant. So,
Okay, so I got that. So help me how we continue that without this maybe the DE and I thing that has a narrative of its own that
yeah.
can get discussions like this lost.
So I'm going to answer that question, which is really good and very ad hoc right now, right? Um, so first of all, interesting enough, I spoke in front of a group of executives at Walmart the day before this was said, and it was all about the business angle. So I tell you, I know Walmart has a position that, that is public, but Walmart people know where the growth is coming from. So that's important to know. And I don't know if I actually should have said that, but I that's my impression as personally somebody that spoke to some people there. Um, but I'm going to tell you how the LDC approaches things. We first of all believe in, you know, inclusion. That's extremely important for us. We, as a community that has been excluded, we believe that nobody should be excluded. So we believe in inclusion. That's a must. Having said that, the angle of the Latino Donor Collaborative has nothing to do with inclusion. Inclusion is given by people that know what the right thing to do is. Our point of view is by people that know that they have a duty to grow and they want to find the growth. That's us. So we are a business angle and we present the Latino community as a segment of your growth strategy. Not only because the growth is coming from our community, period. That's a mathematical thing. And we could be purple, we could be it doesn't really matter the color. Actually, in the community, as you know, and as you will mention, people don't think you're Latino. People think that I am Latina. But there we go from Rosario Dawson in the Afro Latina segment to Cameron Diaz in the Swedish looking segment, right? So, we are not actually a race. We're actually a community united by the same values, by work ethic, by family, right? So the values are what really gather us together. So we at the LDC emphasize constantly that. Again, we support inclusion. That is important for us. But our angle has always been, do you want to grow? Let us tell you how. And let us give you input and tools so that you know why you are not growing, or if you're growing, how to continue grow.
Okay, I'm going to watch where I'm going to go here. There's two more things that you brought up. Again, I'm going to frame this. Moving from diversity to inclusion and results to methods. Okay. Um, when you lead in the age of standardization, it's about diversity, it's about results, it's about brand identity, it's about tribal, because it loves to control everything. But now the world is so different, and we have to start learning how to listen to difference, much like you're teaching us today. We're moving to this, or we're already in the age of personalization, so we have to see people as human. We have to understand the individual identities, and we have to start being inclusive. But what we really need to do, and I think this is your message, is that get to know our people and then begin to experiment and see for yourself. And as a consequence of that, you will automatically become more inclusive. You see the point? And what I've
Yeah.
learned in the research that we've done, that there is a clear correlation between diversity and results, like just focus on the numbers the way we've always done them, because we just put people, we make people feel unwelcome, unseen, and known. And so if you're going to get the number, you're going to have to do it the way we've always told you and how we've prescribed it to you. But if you want real growth, you have to start experimenting with new methods on how to drive real, new growth. But you can't do that and start until you start including populations of people that not only represent these new growing consumer groups, but also this new workforce that, as I said at the beginning of the show, we always talk about personalization in the marketplace, but not in the workplace. And I think what you're making us realize here is if 30% of the new births, if um, hold on a second, 25% of the youth, something's happening here. And there's going to be those that win should have started experimenting 10 years ago. But if we give them a pass for just a moment, if they don't experiment now, they're done. And I think what this
Yeah.
does, it puts us all at risk. So anyway, I'd love for you to give me your
Yeah,
comments, but this is
I
how I
don't
wanted to
agree with
kind
the
of,
way I don't agree with the way you're framing it
okay.
because you're back to DEI, Glenn.
No, I'm not at DEI.
You're back
Absolutely
to
not.
DEI. You're
No.
back to, it's nice to include different people so that you can know that you can grow. That's the DEI argument. We don't do that. For us, it's good business. Where is the good business today?
No, no,
Independently of the color. Where is the
Anna,
good business? Where's the
we're, we're,
growth?
we're saying the same thing. I said, we're going to
Yeah, but be
experiment.
careful. Can I finish this?
Go, go,
Be
go, go,
careful with
go.
the terms that you use because everything that you just said is by the book, the DEI argument. Include different people and you'll grow. No, and I like that people say that and I respect them, but I have to differentiate the Latino Donor Collaborative. We're not that. We're
Mm,
not include and if you do good, then you'll get it back. No, this is a business conversation of where the growth is coming from.
mhm,
This is not an experiment. This is not try it and you'll see that it'll be fine. No, this is not an experiment. This is facts. I'm telling you mathematically where the growth is coming from and that you have to know that segment because if not, you won't grow. Period. So it's completely different. And I understand that and I want to clarify it here for you and for your audience because that's where the argument is lost.
mm,
That's where we differentiate ourselves from the inclusion is great. No, inclusion is great. We know that. That's a
mhm.
given. The LDC is not about that argument. The LDC is about where the growth is coming from and where you should be looking at.
Okay, so you're saying that don't experiment, just go all in.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to tell you, the brands that we work with, and it's by the book, that are the number one brand in the world, because most of them are obviously
Mhm,
corporations that are global,
mhm,
are the ones that know this and that act on it every day. So I'm going to give you an example, with L'Oreal. And these people knew most of the things that we already knew. And we were both experiment and getting to know new facts. But they had been acting on it for years. And therefore, they're the number one brand. I mean, there was no brainer, right? T-Mobile, quite frankly. I mean, Target. I mean, there's I can go on and on. I mean, no, you don't have any option. As this CMO that I mentioned at our convening last year, I mentioned to you here, said, it's mathematically impossible to continue growing if you don't include Latinos. And not as a race, not as a DEI premise, as a
Mm.
segment of your market.
So, how are we going to get people to invest all in, Ana?
With the numbers. That's why we do what we do. So, and that's why brands call us, right? That's why presidential candidates call us. That's why, resource allocators in the policy world call us, because you got to know how to do it. You got to know who these people are, how to get them, how to engage them. I've done consulting for, people that are doing a vaccination campaign. And if you need them to vaccinate, you need to know how to approach them and how to offer things and the challenges and what not to say and authentically engage them. It really happens at all levels in the resource allocating world in this country and everywhere. And so all those leaders need to know who Latinos are, address them, invest on them, right? The political candidates that won this time invested in the long term in certain communities with it. They understood which
Mhm.
communities to go to, because a community is not homogeneous, but they knew where to go to and how to cultivate them for not months, years. And so that's what businesses have to do. There's no other way out.
So Ana, to close, take us 10 years from now. What do we see?
That's a great, again, question. I love our conversations. So 10 years from now, if um, the majority of American resource allocators, and I'm talking every segment in this country, understand this, you see a country that will have continued to be the leader of the world, because they understood that while Japan and some countries in Europe were not able to sustain the growth because they didn't have the workforce and the
Mm.
birth rates and the immigration organization in order to get, and continue growing. The United States continues growing because of this population that has inside, that can be nurtured and cultivated and can be educated and can be supported and included and given access to and credits and everything. And that's why this country continues growing. If we don't have the majority of resource allocators of this country understanding this, you'll have a country that have, you know, um, deported this workforce, that had not invested in it, and that is, just sustained by the population that is actually diminishing by the day, and that doesn't welcome change because,
Mm.
they're set in their ways.
So on this note, just to get further clarification, how do you define invested?
How do you
Because
define investment?
invested in investment, investing in the Latino community. How would you define
Investing
that?
means getting to know them professionally, intentionally, not just I'm going to have a friend that's going to tell me,
Mm.
but investing on first getting to know them.
Mhm.
Second, acquiring tools to be able to make decisions based on the knowledge that you just acquired. Second, create policy strategies, marketing, communication, um, everything that matters to cultivate, to empower a community to continue being the engine of growth, giving access, again, giving credit in the case of entrepreneurs, um, creating, knowing that they're credit ready and, providing more, mortgages so that they build family growth and generational, wealth. Um, Understanding at all levels. Again, is the government, is media, is the production, the consumer products companies, the the people that are doing policy locally, statewide, federal, that is investing in where the growth is coming from at all levels.
Final question. What do we need to do as a community to earn that investment?
Brilliant question. I have three. One is learn who you are and learn who your community is. We, the other 84% that are not living in poverty, are not unique. There are many of us, but we don't unite, right? So start not only, well, first, get to know your community. You know this number, Glenn, but according to the Latino GDP report from the LDC, if Latinos in the United States were an economy, they would be the fifth largest economy in the world within the United States. Forget about Latin
Mhm.
America, only the United States.
Yeah.
So if the parents that were in a lot of, in a large part immigrants with nothing, right, build the fifth largest economy, imagine what the kids will do. So just keep that in mind. Understand that community, get to know it. That's the first one. The second one, so because it's us, right? It brings pride. It brings, it's great to tell my kids that they are part of this community that is outstanding, right? So get to know your own community for Latinos. Second, help each other. What makes a
Hmm.
Latino successful makes you more successful. When a Latino fails, unfortunately, it reflects on us, whether we know them or not, whether we had anything to do with their failure, whether, but whatever it is, we can be on the other side of the world. That failure is ours. So celebrate and help Latinos to prosper. And the other one is one that came out from our convening last week was créetela. That there's no translation in English for créetela. What means is if you're the fifth largest economy in the world, and if you're a young person, right, whose parents came here with nothing, and you're the first one to go to college, imagine that your parents created the fifth largest economy. Créetela. Believe, believe, imagine what you will do. That will empower you to do what, now that your parents are, more prosperous, they're sending you to college, you're a kid that is graduating from this incredible graduate rate that the Latino community has from college, right? Believe it, know it, act on it, put it in your DNA and become that because you're part of that community that is literally outstanding.
Anna, I can't thank you enough. I feel like we both kind of just got lost in the conversation because it's something, no, because it's something that really matters
Yeah.
to us both.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, you are the perfect leader
Oh, thank
to spearhead this strategy. I'm not even going to call it an initiative,
you.
to spearhead this strategy, and you keep pushing,
Thank you.
and you keep helping people understand. And as you know, you can't convince anybody about these things. They have to see it themselves. And I have to tell you that after, looking at the reports, the level of professionalism, I mean, the LDC is doing, just first class work, and the consistency around what you're doing to help lead by example is truly remarkable. And, I'm sharing this with, my listeners because look, these things, they're not easy. They're hard, but I want everybody else who is thinking about this conversation to look at themselves and ask themselves, what are you doing for your community? What are we doing to find ways to interconnect and recognize that in the end of the day, if we're not all more interconnected and interdependent upon each other, everybody loses. And so to ignore or fail to understand the Latino community hurts everybody in the end of the day.
Exactly.
So this is not about us versus them. This is all about, us together, we. And what you're trying to do and what you are doing, it just exemplifies what leadership really means. And I really thank you for
No, thank you.
just the way you carry yourself, and you are living what you're asking others to consider. And
Thank you.
I really appreciate what you've done today and enlightening us with not just the severity of the issue, but just the opportunity that it really brings for all of us. So thank you again for your time, Anna.
Thank you so much, Glenn, for inviting me, for your incredibly kind words. We're partners on this. I know that you are doing so much. I thank you for everything that you're doing and for the opportunity to be here with you yet again. I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No, you're very, very welcome. And when you lead in the age of personalization, as Anna's doing, you will see things that others don't. Do what others won't, and you'll keep pushing when prudence says quit. Muchas gracias, Ana. Un fuerte
A
abrazo.
ti, Glenn, muchísimas gracias y a tu audiencia también.
Gracias.
Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Llopis. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.